Uh-huh. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming for this conversation with Santiago Peña, President of Paraguay. On August 15, 2023, Santiago Peña became the youngest president of the democratic era of the Republic of Paraguay. Despite his young age, and he was telling us that among some of the Latin American presidents today, he feels old because we're having a new generation of presidents that are more pragmatic, more shore-oriented, and willing to put ideologies a little bit aside for the benefit of forming a common regional agenda. And I think that's very refreshing from the ideological clashes that maybe in the past limit Latin America of having a regional view with which to negotiate with other regions and with which to negotiate with the multilateral community. He has a long career in the highest position in his country's cabinet, as well as in multilateral organizations. President Peña was in the staff of the Central Bank of Paraguay for many years, finally becoming a member of their board of directors. Following that, he was a Minister of Finance of his country. Previously, he had an important career here in Washington, D.C. at the IMF, and he has also worked in academia, both in his country, Paraguay, and in the US. In 2017, he made his inroads with his first presidential run within his party, losing the primary, but in 2022, he ran again and became the candidate from the Honor Colorado movement, and in 2023, becoming the president-elect of his country. We were fortunate to host then candidate Peña for a conversation at the Georgetown Americas Institute at the beginning of the year, understanding and learning his plans for transforming Paraguay. And today we're extremely fortunate to have him back as the president of Paraguay, basically to share with you his plans for the country, his plans for the region, and basically his view of the world and the role that Paraguay can play in basically transforming Latin America into a more just and prosperous region. His country faces structural challenges on the governance, corruption, and obviously addressing the destructive effects of climate change. Paraguay's economy has shown remarkable resilience in the past year, navigating through COVID, through significant droughts, but basically being a very stable economy in a very unstable region. So the Georgetown Americas Institute is pleased to welcome President Peña for this conversation. The conversation will be moderated by Georgetown Americas Institute Managing Director Denise Yanovich and the IDB Roberto de Michelis, Division Chief of the Inter-American Development Bank, on the future of Paraguay and his plans for his young administration. As I said, this event is sponsored by Georgetown Americas Institute, the Embassy of Paraguay, Georgetown Latin America and the Caribbean Policy Association, and the IDB. Very quickly, Roberto de Micheli is the Division Chief at the Inter-American Development Bank's Innovation in Citizen Services. He has a very long career in multilateral organizations and also in his country's Argentina administration, focusing on anti-corruption, governance, etc. He holds a BA from the University of Buenos Aires and an LLM from Yale University. Denise Yanovich is the Managing Director of the Georgetown Americas Institute. Prior to joining Georgetown University, Denise was Deputy to the President of the Inter-American Dialogue, one of the leading think tanks on Latin America. She has worked at the Embassy of Colombia here in town, managing their public diplomacy program, and FEDesarrollo, the leading think tank on economic issues in his native Colombia. She holds a BS in economics from the Universidad Los Andes, also a master's in art history from Courtauld Institute of Art, University College London. Let me just, by closing, say that we will be following the standard speech and expression policy of the university during this event. And with that, I will turn it for President Peña for his initial remarks, and then we'll follow for some further conversation with Denise and Roberto, and obviously we will open up the floor to your questions. Again, thank you, President Peña.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. It's such a pleasure to be back at Georgetown. I appreciate having this opportunity to spend with Denise and Roberto. With Denise, we were here in January. I was then a candidate, and I was hoping to have the majority of the votes that happened in April 30. And with Roberto, we know for many, many years, from the time I was member of the board of the Central Bank, then Minister of Finance. So we have a lot of experience. It's great for me to come here again, to spend time with a lot of students, with a lot of faculty members, people from the international community that gathers here in Washington. It's always a pleasure to see how this location in the capital of the U.S. is the confluence also of so much that is happening in the world. So there is a lot happening in South America, and it is my intention during the time that we're going to be here telling you what a great country Paraguay is. And I'm sure a lot of you will say that you never heard anything about Paraguay, and you're right. Paraguay for many years was an island surrounded by land, has been isolated from the rest of the world, and there are good reasons for it. We had these very difficult times 150 years ago. We went to a war against our neighbors. For 6 years, we lost 60% of the territory and 90% of the male population. So we learned from the hard way the difficulties of war. We learned the hard way the hardship of trying to recover a nation after a conflict. So when we have to talk about what is happening today in the war, what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, we know from our own experience. So we raise our voice and we demand that the conflict should stop. This is something that will have enormous consequences for the coming years, no matter how this war ends. So we also, from our own experience, we experienced dictatorship. We had the longest dictatorship in South America, 35 years. The gentleman here in the second row was the U.S. ambassador at that time, and he is a living experience of what Paraguay went through. And now we can compare 35 years of dictatorship with 35 years of democracy, and the results are astonishing. Despite all the complaints that we heard about many democracies in Latin America and the rest of the world, democracy is always a better political system than dictatorship or lack of democracy. And this is something that I feel on the obligation, a moral obligation, to raise the voice in our region that is dominated by countries that choose democracy. So when we see what is happening in Venezuela or what is happening in Nicaragua, it's not that we want to get into their business. We just want to share our own experience and what have done for Paraguay and the people of Paraguay. Over the last 35 years, Paraguay has been developing, has been growing as a nation, has been improving the standard of living. There's still a lot that needs to be done. There's still a lot of areas where we need to do a better job. But we think that as we enter this more complicated war, and it's very hard to understand what is true and what is not true, I think that this younger generation, I feel, despite that I'm getting a bit old with 44 compared to the new presidents that are coming in the region, this new generation that is trying to look not to the right, not to the left, but we want to look forward. We want to advance as a region, and I think that Paraguay has a lot to offer in this process. So I will be very happy to answer all of the questions that you may have. I have to recognize I am in love of my country, so I have a very positive view. I have the opportunity to live outside of my own country. I am critical of many of the things that we need to do better, but I truly believe that this is the best kept secret in the region and probably in the world. This is one of the most amazing countries. It has a huge potential, not only on the things that we are doing now, which is mostly food production, but what is going to happen in the world in the coming years. The energy transition. We are the largest producer of clean renewable energy in the world. 100% of the electricity that we use comes from hydro plants, and we only use 20% of the electricity. So the potential to continue to grow using sustainable sources is huge. What we are planning in terms of the development of urban parks, in terms of hydrogen production, to mobilize not only industries but people in the future, is something that will put Paraguay at the center stage in the coming years. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you, President Peña. So we're going to ask, originally we had planned one question each, but I think we will have time to ask 2 questions each, and then we'll open it up for questions from students at Georgetown. We give priority to students, and I would ask you to line up. There's a microphone on the right, so once we switch over to questions for students, just line up at the microphone to ask your questions. Roberto, if you want to start us off.
Thank you, and Mr. President, it's really a pleasure to be with you again, and thanks to the Americas Institute for organizing this. You took office, and almost a couple of days later, you took a very bold move. You decided to call for an anti-corruption program. One different element compared to many other countries, that instead of doing something for the executive branch, you called the court, Supreme Court, you called Congress, you called the Office of the Comptroller General, and you called the Attorney General. And you basically laid out foundations for a plan in 90 days, but has to involve all these areas of the state of Paraguay. This is new, so most countries just go with the executive branch. What do you plan to do in this 90 days? Where's this plan going? And where's the follow-up? Particularly, I want to go back to your experience before you were in government. You were an IMF staff member, and you know very well the importance of international standards, particularly related to money laundering, anti-corruption, and the perception sometimes external sources have of the situation of a country. For example, Paraguay has a beneficial ownership registry. Not every country in the region has it, but not everyone knows about this. So where do you see this plan going? Where do you see it will affect these international standards? How do you think it will change the perception of investors and people measuring the level and impact of corruption in your country?
Yeah, the idea, this notion of joining efforts with all branches of power. And Paraguay, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a thrilling democracy. It's one, in my view, is one of the most active democracies in the region. And it's very hard to understand from the outside, right? Because I belong to a party that has been in power for the last 75 years. But their own party has been the source of renewal. I was affiliated to a different party in the past. I never did any type of politics in Paraguay. So I decided a couple years ago, and the reason is, in my own experience in dealing with politics and politicians, a lot of, and I'm sure many of you have heard, oh, you know, politics, you don't get into this only the bad stuff. And this is something like we call in economy the fulfilling prophecy. And when you say that something is bad, that eventually happened already. So in politics in Paraguay, not a lot of people, and mostly the youngsters, they don't want to get involved in politics. So at the end, what you get is the worst people get into politics, right? And at the end, politics is not very good. So I said, what it will do for me, all the education and all the training, if I don't understand that at the end, the power holds on the people, and the people transfer the power to elected officials to do the things that are right to do. So that's why I entered into politics and try to do a lot of this, trying to convince people the right way. And I did a lot of this from the public sector as a civil servant, and I'm doing this as a president of the Republic, and give you a lot of attention and a lot of power. So what I thought is, okay, from this position, I need to tackle a problem that is endemic for the society. Corruption is not a problem for one institution. This is a problem for society. So in Paraguay, we have good examples that when the society joins forces, when different sectors of society work together, there's absolutely nothing that we cannot achieve. And AML is one of them. In 2008, Paraguay went through the third round of evaluation of the AML anti-money laundering evaluation, and the results were horrible. And we didn't know what we were doing. It's not that we knew it and we were doing on purpose. We didn't understood. So the multilateral institution helped Paraguay. We brought together and we came out, and in the last evaluation, the fourth round of evaluation, Paraguay obtained the same qualification as Uruguay and Chile, the same, which for many people, even for Paraguayans, nobody believed it, right? So what happened is that we have a perception and reality, there is a big gap. And while we need to improve human capital and strengthen institutions, there is a huge space where we can improve the perception about what Paraguay is doing. So in doing that, I said, I'm not going to change perception only by doing myself. So I brought together the president of the Supreme Court. I invited the president of Congress, and one little note. On the election on April, I got the biggest difference in the history of Paraguay election. There was never so much difference between the elected president and the second. And I obtained majority in both chambers of Congress, majority in the Senate and majority in the lower chamber. And out of the 17 governors that runs the region of Paraguay, 15 belongs to my team, the team that were elected together. So I appointed and I choose 15 out of the 17. So if I were to think, okay, I have a lot of power, I said, I don't need the others. But in democracy, you need all the other branches of power. This is how democracy is built. So I said, let's work together, let's bring a plan, and we make a huge impact in the cultural change about how we fight corruption. So I think, and we put a very short period of time to launch this strategy, 90 days, and this is advancing very, very fast. I have the chief of cabinet here who is chasing everybody inside and outside of the economic cabinet and different branches of power. And this is going to happen before the end of November. So I feel very optimistic. We witnessed that when Paraguay decided to move forward in one agenda, we were able to do it. And I think this fight against corruption is going to happen also very, very fast. Of course, this is not the only challenge for Paraguay. Security is also a major challenge that we have. But the idea is the same. We need to think in a collective way. We need to bring all the people together to the table. And you need to also show what are the changes that we are expecting in the coming years.
Thank you. President Peña, you mentioned that your party has been in power for 75 years. In the region, we're seeing a lot of anti-establishment votes. How do you explain the stability of the Colorado Party in Paraguay?
The two parties in Paraguay, the Colorado and the Liberal, they were founded after the war, right? And a little bit of history about Paraguay. In 1850, Paraguay was by far the most advanced economy in Latin America. And in 1864, we went to this war with our neighbors. So it was the country completely destroyed. So these two parties were created after the war, and the idea of the party was to rebuild the nation. And when you look at the charter of the party that was founded in 1887, the concept of unifying the nation, rebuilding the nation, maintaining the family as the core foundation of the society. So 153 years have passed since then. But the concept is 133 years has passed after the foundation of the party, and the concepts that we hold today are exactly the same. So we're not talking about, oh, you know, we need a more progressive agenda, or we need a less progressive or more conservative. No, these are basic concepts of unifying the nation, on building the nation, on allowing people to raise socially from people that comes from most vulnerable families to also have opportunities through health education. So these concepts are very general for the society. So it's not something that identify only the party, but identify the Paraguayan society as a nation. So of course, it's not easy to do politics any part of the world. I ran 6 years ago, and I was a new person in politics, and I have this history of being in another party. So I campaign not based on my political affiliation, but based on my view about Paraguay, where Paraguay is coming from, where Paraguay stands today, and where Paraguayans could be in the next couple of years. So at the beginning, apparently my message was not getting there, but I was full convinced that the message was getting to the youngster generation. So I said to myself, it's going to take a little bit longer, but it will get there. And eventually it will happen, and it will trigger a change in the view about Paraguay. I fought against populism. I think populism, either from the right or the left, it makes a lot of danger for our society. So I campaign against populism. I campaign against polarization, this idea that let's divide the society. I don't want a divided society. I want a unified society. And I fought against the post-truth, which is something that is really happening. Media plays an important role in communication, and we need to fight against that. So I spend a lot of time talking to media, talking to students, talking to different groups, and it's not true that the message doesn't get. The message gets. If you are able to convey, if you are also being very honest in accepting the things that we are not doing right, because I cannot say we are doing everything right, but if we are able to recognize and acknowledge the things that we need to do better, but also showing the things that we are doing better, I think at the end this is what the people of Paraguay choose on the election of April the 30th. And I said repeatedly, the theory about evolution talks that it's not the larger and the stronger species, the one that remain, is the one that is able to adapt, right? And every society and the parties also need to adapt to the changing conditions, right? 30, 40 years ago, probably the Colorado Party electorate would not accept someone who was in another party. Today they accept, despite they being identified with the principle of the party, but they say, you know, I'm not gonna be tough on this guy who maybe was not at the party, but now has chosen the party and has decided to run for the party.
Wonderful.
Mr. President, I was last week in Paraguay and held a series of meetings, one organized by your office on some very technical issues about regulation and administrative simplification. Two issues came to my attention, and as we all know, administrative simplification and better quality in regulations enhances trust and lowers barriers to entry, and including, you know, eventually removes some potential for corruption. Two things struck me. First, people were younger than you. Second, they were extremely sharp and well-trained. So my question is, how did you manage to convey this type of people into government? And B, how do you think you can retain them once you leave office?
Well, I think that I am an example. I entered civil service at the age of 19. I worked for the central bank many years, and I was able to share with a group of Paraguayans who also devoted a lot of time working as a civil servant. Except for two of the members of the cabinet who are here today, who come from the private sector, and I have to spend a lot of time convincing them to leave the private sector, to come to the public sector. The rest is people who has been trained on public policy, who has worked nationally and internationally in multilateral institutions, and understand the importance of sound public policy. One of the advantages of Paraguay is that we have been consistently implementing good and sound public policies. In the back, I see Alejandro Santos. Alejandro Santos was the mission chief 20 years ago. 20 years ago when we have the standby arrangement with the IMF. And during that time, what he worked and the team that worked is, let's break the circle and the trap of instability about Paraguay. And they managed to do. They put together a program. We not disbursed $1 single out of the IMF. So we did it because we wanted to do it, not because there was money behind it. And this make a huge impact. One of those impacts, and this is on the benefit of the IMF, who is always blamed for asking countries to raise taxes. In the case of Paraguay, they proposed to lower taxes, right? So in 2004, Paraguay went from 30% tax rate to 10% tax, and the economy started to boom. There was a process of formalization, tax collection increased. So those are the type of things, and we saw this. It's not only that you look at the theory, we saw this in practice. So there's a lot of people in Paraguay working in the public and the private sector that is convinced that if we implement sound public policy, the country is going to develop and the sky is the limit. So what is that they want? They want someone who believes on this. And I have the opportunity to be appointed Minister of Finance by a person who had no prior experience in the public sector, but he has a lot of experience in the private sector. And he was able to appoint me without knowing me, but he saw my CV. And I was able to do the same with the person who came to work with me and now is the chief of cabinet. She sent me an email, and I was Minister of Finance. She was working here in Washington. And she wrote me, you know, my name is Lea, I work for the World Bank, and I feel so enthusiastic that Paraguay is finally appointing the right people in the right position. And I say, oh, you should come back to Paraguay and maybe we'll work together. So she came, she was my Vice Minister of Economy. And when I resigned to run for president, she became the first woman to be Minister of Finance in the history of Paraguay. So one step takes to the other, and we are convinced that if we are able to do the right job now, this will also encourage other people not only to come to public service, but most important, and this is my objective in this administration, encourage people to enter into politics. I think this is the way how things change. And let me just mention this beautiful anecdote that I keep repeating to everybody. I was appointed Minister of Finance at the age of 35. I thought I have all the power in the world that I can imagine. So I went to Congress, and I was going to talk to the Economic and Budget Commission. And I said to myself, I have all the answers to these guys. I'm going to lecture them what they have to do. So for 2 hours, I gave a presentation, very nice charts, PowerPoint, all the facts about development and what a nation needs to do. And after 2 hours, one of the member of parliaments, a guy who barely finished high school and has been there for, 20 years, he said, very nice, Minister, how many votes do you have? And I said, what do you mean? Yeah, how many votes? I don't have votes. Yeah, you have one vote. The vote of confidence that the president gave you when he appointed you. Do you have any idea how hard I worked to be here? I'm here because people choose me. And for that, I have to convince people. And now you are coming here with a nice suit and a PowerPoint telling me what I have to do? It doesn't work that way. You need to go out. You need to talk to people. And when people trust you, then you're going to be able to do things. That's why I decided to enter into politics. And that's why when I lose in 2017, I said to myself, I cannot stop. Because if people said that I enter into a race, I lose, and I felt that my heart was broken and I went home and never tried again, what was the message that I was sending? So I keep trying this, and I did it on the second time. So if we want to change the world, we need to get into politics. It sounds hard, but it's the only way to do the changes.
Wonderful. Earlier, we were talking about Paraguay's trade agenda. There's a long-standing negotiation with Mercosur and the European Union. What do you believe is the future of that agreement? And also, there's been talks about an agreement between Mercosur and China. So if we could get your views on both of those, that would be...
I think the country is very complicated. Every region has its own dynamics. Mercosur has been advancing in the process of integration. Our countries, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina, we have advanced a lot in the last 30 years since the signing of Mercosur. There's a lot more that we need to do, and that is not subject to an agreement with other parts of the world. I mean, there's still a lot that we need to do in integrating, but integrating with other countries and other regions is also very, very good. But in that process, we face a conflict of interest in other regions. And the EU has bigger problems than negotiating an agreement with Mercosur. So I think that the European Union is facing problems with immigration. I think it's facing problems in how to sustain food production without increasing subsidies. So when they need to think about, okay, we're going to engage now to negotiate an agreement with the part of the world that produce 60% of all the protein in the world is not an easy job. And region, we don't subsidize food production. So this is very, very competitive. So what I'm trying to tell you is that my expectation that after 30 years of discussions, this will get to a point where we're going to agree, I don't think so. I think that there are other parts of the world that were not that relevant in international trade 5-10 years ago, and today there are major players. I think of Singapore, I think of the Emirates, and we saw a couple of years ago that Dubai was the center for the Middle East. Today it's the center for the world. It's amazing how trade has increased in that part of the world. And China is also an important player. You know, Paraguay is the largest country in the world that holds relations with Taiwan, and we're going to continue to that. I like we have one guy here in the front row that, with a very nice t-shirt, I love Taiwan. I love Taiwan too. So we're going to stick to that relation, but that relation doesn't impede Paraguay and Mercosur to advance in negotiations with China. So I think that we need to do our part and of course, trying to convey the message. Integration is always better than division. I think that globalization has done a lot of good things, but also has posed a lot of risks for the world. And we need to face those risks. And I think that Paraguay is in a great position to face this situation.
I'm going to ask students to start lining up, and while they line up, I'm going to ask one last question, and to inspire people here to get into politics, what is like the main lesson for students if they want to become president? I'm sure a lot of Georgetown students come to Georgetown thinking they might one day run for president in their own countries or even in the US. What would be your message for them?
If I have to say one suggestion, and what has been very great for me, and of course, knowledge is a great tool. Use that knowledge. But the most important thing is don't lie to the people. And this sometimes is the hardest part for every politician, right? Because it's not easy to say, I can, or this is not the way. So let me tell you my own experience. When I was appointed Minister of Finance, and of course I was trained as an economist, I was trained in public policy, so I knew the job for the Minister of Finance. And I made only one question to the president, who didn't know me. He saw my CV. I said, you know, you are a young professional, you're well-trained, people speak very good about you, you should be Minister of Finance. I said, President, I have one question. What is that? How many times can I say no? Why? He asked me, why are you asking me? Because the Minister of Finance needs to manage unlimited needs for limited resources. So you are telling no most of the time. I promise you, I will make it the yes most of the time, but despite all my effort, the no will come most of the time, and the no has to be a no. And I knew how to say no, and I know how to say it on a very nicely way. You have to be very nice to say no, right? So I enjoyed this part of my job. So when I entered into politics, and remember, being Minister of Finance, this is the most unpopular job that you will find. And in the case of Paraguay, it's double unpopular because you collect taxes, so you put your hand on the pockets of the people and you take the money out of the pockets. And then when you need to distribute the money, nobody's happy. The Minister of Education is not happy. The Minister of Public Works is not happy. The Minister of Health is not happy. Nobody's happy, right? So you have to do it in a way that is very good. Yeah, no, all of them. I mean, we were talking with the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Industry, and I said, you have additional things that are in common. One, you have a very poor budget, right? So, but their responsibilities are huge. The Ministry of Environment is at the center of our agenda. So I keep repeating about the green agenda, and he said to me, I said, but President, your agenda doesn't align with the budget. We have a very little budget, right? So when I enter into politics, I start talking about these things, and when people were complaining, oh, you know, I don't find a job, and I don't find education, I don't find attention, healthcare, and I said to them, yes, and you know, this is how we change it. So a lot of old politicians around me say, oh, you know, Santiago, you are getting very well on this thing about politics. And I said, you know, it's not that hard. The only thing that you have to do is don't lie to people. Because sometimes when you don't know how to say no, and you say, yeah, I'm going to give you need a job, I get you a job. You need education, I will get you a scholarship. The problem is you are not able to fulfill those promises. Then you cannot go out in the streets. And people start complaining about you, or you are a liar. And the truth is that people, they want you to show what is the path. Okay, let me know how you're going to be better. But don't come here and just tell me I'm going to give you this or that. So my single recommendation, know your business, don't lie, and this will get you a lot of votes.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the students. Please introduce yourself and let us know what you're studying and what year you're at Georgetown. Thank you.
Hi, buenas tardes, señor presidente. Paraguay Americana, te vi el año pasado. Muchas gracias de vuelta por venir. My name is Luz Velasquez. I am in the second year of the Masters in Global Human Development program. And something that's very evident in our country, Paraguay, is that many people go and study, many people have access to education, but once they have the degree, it becomes pretty useless. In our country, family members who are lawyers by training, medics by training, and unfortunately, unless you know someone in power are from the Colorado Party, there's a lot of tension in job access. And so my question to you is, how do you aim to bridge that gap? How do you aim to help communities from these rural areas who are seeking access to the markets in Paraguay, but can't do so because of economic issues, lack of power and connections? Would love to know your stance. Y gracias por estar aquí.
No, thank you very much, Luz. Job opportunity is something that we need to address, and good quality and high quality jobs. One of the objectives that I put to myself is create at least 500,000 new jobs in the next 5 years, and I think this could be attained. Of course, everybody wants to have the best job at the beginning. I wanted to have the best job after I came to Paraguay from grad school. And I went back to the central bank to do exactly the same job I was doing before. And I said to her, but I have a grad study from Colombia. I should deserve to be at the center of the stage. And it's hard. So you need to work very, very hard. But something that I keep repeating to a lot of the youngsters is that if Paraguay was able to choose to elect someone that went to a private school, and this is a huge privilege, someone that was able to do study in economics, went to a grad school abroad thanks to a scholarship, I can tell you nobody gave nothing for free. I worked it very, very hard. And this is something that we also need to convey to the younger generation. They think that they are entitled to everything. And we need to work very, very hard. Hardship sometimes is not something bad. From our side, from the government side, we need to improve the access to jobs through very competitive process. And we have experience in doing that. The central bank today has the most competitive process of selection. It's harder than getting into med school. In the case of the Ministry of Finance also, they have improved a lot. We need to expand this to other institutions. We had bad experience, we have to acknowledge. And in the past, and I had to take the very tough decision of canceling selection process from Itaipu, which is very controversial. And some of the students, some of the applicants have very good qualifications, but others did not have the qualifications. So the process was contaminated. So I decided to cancel and to call it again. And it created a lot of noise. So sometimes doing the right thing, it takes you to take the hardest decisions, but I'm willing to do the hardest decision. At the bottom is we need to generate jobs, and jobs will come from investment. And this investment will come from trusting the government, that the government is doing the right decisions. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Alberto Maresca. I am a student here at the Master of Arts in Latin America Studies at Georgetown. My question is related to the BRICS. The BRICS group that is attracting several Latin American countries. We've seen that with Brazil at first, Argentina now, and Venezuela appears to be closer and closer to the BRICS group. Now, given the economic size of Paraguay, this could be a possibility for Paraguay, but given the strong relation with Taiwan, I believe that politically it would be hard to get into the BRICS for Paraguay. To what extent the relation with Taiwan is beneficial for Paraguay, or to what extent it is more beneficial for maintaining U.S. interest in the region? Thank you very much.
Great question, Alberto. Thank you very much. Our relation with Taiwan has absolutely nothing to do with the U.S. interest in supporting Taiwan. It has everything to do with our decision on maintaining a relation that has been built over 66 years. And most importantly, on our view of how we see Paraguay developing in the future, more as an industrialized nation rather than only producing food or raw materials. The advantage or the difference between Paraguay and the countries that you mentioned, more importantly, the last two, Venezuela and Argentina, is that Paraguay, on the other side, completely different, is the most stable and solid macroeconomic country in Latin America. Paraguay this year is going to obtain 80 years of its national currency. This is, together with Colombia, the longest currency in Latin America. So this is an element of how stable the Paraguayan economy is. We have plenty of access to international financing. We are very close to having investment grade rating. Paraguay has the lowest debt to GDP among all the countries in Latin America. So this makes Paraguay less vulnerable to the influence of other countries outside of the region, right? And you mentioned the case of China, and they are going into these countries, and the main reason that they're going is because they find countries that are very vulnerable, right? So it's easy for them to get access to strategic assets of these countries. This is not happening in Paraguay because Paraguay has a very solid macroeconomic situation.
Buenas tardes, señor presidente. ¿Qué tal? Yo soy Fabiola Martínez, vengo de Areguá. Un gusto, gracias por venir. No vemos mucha gente de Paraguay acá normalmente, así que te agradezco. Mi pregunta tiene que ver con lo que ya... sorry, I'm going to do it in English. My question has to do, you talk about, and we talk about, you know, this well-established narrative regarding the Triple Alliance War. We're still very hurt by it at this point, I would say. However, it doesn't seem to be, there doesn't seem to be the same narrative in regards to the dictatorship. So my question to you is, in your view, how important is it to also establish a unifying narrative regarding the legacy of the dictatorship in Paraguay?
Thank you very much, and I agree with you. And I have been talking a lot about the narrative on the Triple Alliance, and I think that we need to convey a stronger message. And I keep repeating this, probably not with the stronger view, because the impact, of course, of a nation that was well ahead on the development of other nations. Paraguay was ahead of other nations, and 153 years ago went through this almost Holocaust, because it was an Holocaust. They killed 90% of the population and took 60% of the territory. It makes a bigger impact, right? But also we need to acknowledge that when we compare 35 years of dictatorship with 35 years of democracy, and we can compare now, we have this exactly the same amount of time that we live under dictatorship and democracy, and the message should be stronger. And this is the example that I am using when I said I raised my voice against the lack of democratic values in Nicaragua or Venezuela. And it has absolutely nothing to do with who is running the country. I'm not making a political statement against them. I'm sharing my own experience. I was raised on democracy. I was 10 years old. And it's amazing, and we don't understand yet the importance of both system and political system. So when you go out in the region and you ask people how much they value democracy, and a lot of people don't value democracy. And I said, this is wrong. We need to change this. And this is part of the narrative that we need to continue to ban. We cannot evaluate the 35 years of dictatorship of Paraguay without understanding what happened before, the 70 years before dictatorship. The 70 years before, Paraguay was an open grave. For 50 years, the first half of the 20th century, we have 50 presidents in 50 years. So there was no any chance of building institution because of the political instability. So dictatorship, with all the bad things that happened and the lack of human rights and the liberties, but the military regime that started in 1958 broke the cycle of political instability. It's very hard to talk about these issues because for people who lived the dictatorship, the 35 years, they say, I don't care what happened before. But we need to understand this. So I get a lot of now questions from Brazilian media. I say, oh, you want to reopen the archives of the Triple Alliance? Well, no, I don't want to rewrite history. We need to understand history. And every period of time has his particular consideration. So we Paraguayans, we don't completely understand what happened in Paraguay over the last 150 years. We need to continue to talk about this, but not from a passionate standpoint, but from an analytical standpoint. The area, and this is, I'm gonna give the reference to Alejandro Santos because he gave me this angle of analysis. He said, the consequences of the war had nothing to do with geography and demography. They were also important, but the most important is what happened in Latin America between 1880 and 1920. 80 million immigrants came to Latin America. This is the largest flow of immigrants in the history of humankind. And it happened in the exact same period where Paraguay was an open grave. So we did not have this flow of immigrants. And those immigrants were the ones who brought knowledge to Latin America, and they found a continent that was so rich in natural resources, right? So these are the things that we need to keep talking, and I agree with you. We need to talk more on what the dictatorship meant to a lot of people. The problem is that a lot of the people that are still leading in business, in politics, in social organization, is people that live under dictatorship. So they have this emotional attachment that you cannot blame them. They live it, right? But as we enter a new generation, and it will happen to you, you are in a much better position to see the good and the bad, and what are the lessons that we can convey not only for ourselves, but for other people in the world. Thank you very much.
Su Excelencia, Señor Presidente, I'm Alan Jung, a Georgetown student from South Korea. So I have a question about your country's grand strategy in relations to East Asia. A prominent Korean politician, Won Il-ryong, attended your inauguration, and so did Vice President Lai Ching-te of ROC Taiwan. What will Paraguay's East Asia strategy look like for the next 5 years? Gracias.
Integrate to all Asian countries. We have great relations with Taiwan. We have great relations with South Korea. We have great relations with Japan. We have to do probably much more. These are the more traditional partners that we had in the past. But Paraguay needs to integrate to the world economy, and we have all the conditions there. No restriction from our side. What we need the world to understand better what Paraguay is. So I think that people don't realize that Paraguay is a country larger than Germany, with a population that is only a fraction of it. 100% of our land is arable, is fertile. We are sitting on top of the largest sweetwater aquifer in the world. We have not access to the sea, but we are surrounded by huge rivers that allow us to produce electricity, to mobilize goods, and our potential to continue to expand food production is enormous. So we need to continue to gain access, and in gaining access, we need to build relations with these countries. So with Asia, we are decided to continue to integrate more to Asian countries.
Thank you so much for coming to Georgetown, Mr. President. My name's Antonin, and I'm a freshman who wants to study international politics. And so in April of last year, one of your opponents in the election was, I think, Paraguay Cubas, who ran on a platform that was quite extreme, quite violent. He called for killing the Paraguay's population of Brasileños, I think. And despite that, he still got almost 25% of the votes. Why is it that so many voters in Paraguay are so almost like dissatisfied and disillusioned with the current democratic system that they're willing to consider such an extreme alternative? Thank you.
They are upset, they are angry because they don't have access to good education, and that low quality education is not allowing them to have access to a good job. They spend a lot of time in a very poor public transit system. Most of them, they suffer from insecurity in the streets. So they have very good reasons to be upset. The question, how we solve this? How we'll solve the lack of access to good education? How we'll solve the problem of security on the streets? How we solve the problem of improving public transportation? And this is where we have different approaches, right? Paraguay Cubas has this anti-system approach. We need to eliminate everything. We need to go back to dictatorship, and I will do everything. I will eliminate Congress. And I have a different view. I think that if we improve the infrastructure facility for prisons, then we can build systems where we are improving the living and the capacity to reinsert people that was in prison into society. We need to work together with the judicial system to differentiate people who is under investigation and people that has been with a sentence. We cannot put together because you have someone who is under investigation and is going to be together with someone who has been already under sentence, and someone who stole a phone, a month later he's an expert on bombings and putting bombs, right? So there are things that we need to solve, and public policy has all the answers to solve this issue. So this is my challenge in the next 5 years, show the path on how public policy will solve many of the problems that many Paraguayans, they don't know how to solve it. They are not trained, they don't need to understand this, but from the public sector, we need to visualize these areas, so they're gonna spend less time in the public transportation system, they're gonna have access to a better job, and this will allow us to have a better life. So I have no doubts that Paraguay have all the conditions to have one of the highest standards of living in the world. If we think about the potential in terms of food production, access to job opportunities, we can do it, and we can do it in a very short period of time.
Thank you.
One more question, so I'm sorry.
Su Excelencia Presidente, gracias por estar aquí. Me llamo Ayush. Soy un freshman. I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences studying who knows what. And my question for you today is, according to the Economist's Democracy Index, Paraguay in 2021 and 2022 has received a lower score than all prior years with a 5.8 out of 10 and has been ranked 77th in the world and is considered a hybrid regime, one step away from an autocracy. What is your plan to promote democratic values within Paraguay and ensure the country sticks to democracy for years to come?
Yeah, you know, these indexes and Paraguay has a lot of job to do in outreaching markets, outreaching different organizations. But I can assure you that that index doesn't make true to Paraguay reality. And I was talking to you before that we know that we need to advance in different areas, but we also know that there is a huge gap between reality and perception. And we need to work to bring this gap down. So one of the things that I want to do in the coming years is outreach markets. But coming here, this is the second time I have been in the US in 60 days since the inauguration. I was at the UN in New York. I came here. So I will come more often, and members of the cabinet and the team will also come more often. And we're going to be a stronger voice on the things that we think that Paraguay matters and matters a lot. So what we saw in April 30, it was a massive participation in the electoral process. It was the most scrutinized election in Paraguay history. We have observers from the European Union, from the OEAs, from different organizations, and they all said this is a clean, free election, and there is absolutely no doubt about the outcome of the elections. We acknowledge that there is a lack of understanding about Paraguay. Outside of Paraguay, it's sometimes hard to understand how political system work, how parties work. And I acknowledge it was hard for me. I'm from Paraguay. But only when I got in, when I started working, when I denied that vision that you don't need to enter into politics because politics is bad, I decided I will face this and I will break this system and this vision that is expelling the good people to enter into politics. So I'm sure that we're gonna change that index from the economic magazine, and we're gonna make that Paraguay one of the more vivid democracies in Latin America. We're gonna show that it's already happening there.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you so much, President Peña. I want to thank my co-moderator, Roberto. I also want to take advantage of this opportunity and thank all the student volunteers who have helped us put this event together. It takes a village. You've been with us this year 2 times. We hope you come a 3rd time, and this becomes a tradition. And you come visit us often here at Georgetown. The doors are open. There's clearly a lot of interest for what you have to say and your experience as president. So thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you very much.